Can you put rules in the trust where I don't want them to fight? This is what's going to happen?
Yeah, you can put what's called a no contest clause.
Okay.
And say if anybody challenges this trust, basically they get removed. They are treated as if they had died. Yeah.
Wow,
Those
that's a good way to have people listen.
Those aren't valid in all states, though.
Okay. Wow.
So
That's really cool. Oh my gosh. Hope everybody's like paying attention. There's so many ins and outs to trust. Welcome everybody. I'm Kamil Sarji, your host of Just 2 Minutes. And today I have Rebecca. Rebecca, you want to tell us about you?
Sure. My name is Rebecca Dupras. I'm an attorney. I have an office in North Providence. I focus primarily on working with folks around their estate planning, so drafting up wills and trusts. And then also, after people pass away, I handle the probate matters or guardianship matters for people who are in need of those services.
Awesome. Yeah, that's perfect because today's topic is we're going to talk about trust. I'm sure the audience, they've heard the word trust. And a lot of agents have heard trusts, and we've dealt with transactions. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that. But first, you know what it's all about. This
Yes.
Just 2 Minutes show. So I have my handy dandy.
I have a question for you, though.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Has anyone ever asked you questions during a 2-minute session?
No.
Okay, I was just curious if the tables were ever turned.
Yeah. Well, actually, one person asked me. Because I asked them tough questions. I think it was like in the beginning. And I said, you can't ask me questions. You can have your own show and ask questions. It's my show. I get to dictate.
That's a good
what
response.
happens.
I was just curious.
Yeah. People come in here, they think they're the boss, you know? It's
Yeah.
my show. I get to...
Right, exactly.
I don't want to be embarrassed. I'd rather embarrass other people than...
Fantastic.
Okay, so I'm not going to embarrass you.
That's fine.
All right, so I got my timer.
Okay.
And go. All right, so Tom and Jerry, like, these guys are always fighting. What would you do, like, to get them to be friends again?
Tom and Jerry.
Yeah.
I suppose, I don't know, I guess you could broker a deal where maybe they could like cohabitate, draw like a line you can't cross over, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe create like a green zone
Okay.
where they could be friends, but then go back to their respective corners after.
Okay, I like that. If you could instantly master a hobby or a sport, what would it be?
Instantly master a hobby or a sport. You know what I've always wanted to learn how to do and like really well is play pool. Like I'm so bad at it
Really?
that I think it would be like fun because it's like, you know, accessible. You can do it with lots of your friends, but I'm just like so bad at it.
Okay, that's cool. Well, that's easy. I can show you. We can go play pool with a bunch of people and
And I
learn.
can show you how terrible I am.
It's just practice. What's a weird food combo that you know of that you like and tastes good? Like,
Maybe anchovy pizza. I think that's like a controversial thing,
Yeah.
but I do like it.
okay. If you could have dinner with one person on this planet right now, who would it be?
Oh my gosh. Probably, that's hard. So many things I want to ask people. Probably like Bernie Sanders.
All right.
Like
well,
I'm pretty progressive in politics, and I think I'd like to just sit down and talk to him about his career.
awesome. Okay. Cool. So what do you think of the questions?
They weren't terrible.
Yeah, it's good. Tom and Jerry, those
I know
two.
that was a really interesting one.
So frustrating. I just want them to stop fighting and just be friends,
I know.
you know? But then it would probably be a boring show.
Yeah.
Like them
probably.
fishing together, like, there's nothing.
No one would watch that. It's like reality TV, you know.
Nothing awesome.
It needs to be controversy.
Yeah, you need drama. Oh my gosh. All right, cool. So Rebecca, tell me, there's like so many cool things that you're involved in with people who are creating trust. You've seen so many different angles with trust. First things first, like, when there's a trust, who owns that trust? What is a trust?
Sure. So a trust is generally part of a larger estate plan, which is made up of a will and sometimes powers of attorney. There's lots of different kinds of trusts, so you can have them set up to be revocable or not, called irrevocable trusts.
All right.
You can have them set up for yourself or for other people. I mean, sometimes it depends on what kind of assets you have and how much money and control you want over those assets to determine which type of trust you want to set up.
Oh.
But I think something else I'm going to say that's probably somewhat controversial is that not everybody needs a trust.
Okay.
So I work with people and I try to determine what they actually need and not sell them on things that they don't need. And what I find to be true is that sometimes when people are earlier on in like their journey, career or wealth planning, they may not be in a position where they have the types of assets that would necessitate a trust, but they doesn't mean that they don't need some kind of plan. So they may still need a will because they have like minor children or, something like that, which could have a trust in it.
So why not just make a will? Why make a trust?
So people make trusts for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people need or want to have some aspect of control over the assets after they pass away. So if they have minor children or children that they don't trust to inherit, large sums of money all at once, they may want to set up a trust. And again, you can do it freestanding or as part of your will. So there's different ways of doing it.
Okay.
And then sometimes people set them up for tax planning purposes. So in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, that's where I practice, there's an estate tax still. So if you own over a threshold amount of money when you pass away, you may potentially pay estate taxes. But if you're married, you can actually shelter some of the money at the initial person to pass away and kind of use up both of the credits that you get. So it increases your ability to access the tax credits that way. So sometimes people do it for tax planning reasons. It also can protect assets from creditors for your beneficiaries. I'm talking about revocable trusts now.
Yeah.
So if you set up a revocable trust and let's say you set one up for your children and you pass away and your children are now the beneficiaries, they would potentially be able to access an asset protection, sort of a force field around the assets while the trust is holding them. So
it seems like it's so many different ways, and I guess meeting with you and figuring out what type of situation will work for them. It seems like everybody's like, I want to trust.
Yeah. A lot of people come in and they tell me that, they spend a lot of time watching like YouTube videos and things. And it's all fine. I mean, I think more information can be useful, but you have to understand how the information applies to you, right? Because just because somebody has something set up for their situation doesn't necessarily mean it's your situation. Sometimes I get people come in and they're like, well, I want my kids to be that term trust fund babies. I hear that all the time. And I'm like, a trust isn't generating assets. You have to have assets to put into the trust. It's kind of like, imagine like setting up an LLC for your business, right? You file all the paperwork and you say, I'm going to have the, Kamil widget business. I'm going to make widgets, right? Just by going down and filing the paperwork with the Secretary of State's office doesn't create the business, right?
Okay.
The business then has to be built and the manufacturing or whatever it is you're doing has to still happen.
You're not saying a trust could be a business.
Well, a trust can hold assets, but what I'm saying is that the trust itself is just...
There's a lot of work involved.
Right, but it's just a vehicle to hold assets. So you have to actually have assets to put into the trust. It doesn't generate them on its own.
Okay.
And I think there's some confusion out there about what a trust actually does.
And that's why we're here. We're going to dumb it down for the smart people that are watching.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing intuitive about this. So that's what I usually tell clients when they come in. Don't feel like you can't ask me questions. There's really no dumb questions because there's nothing intuitive. It's like if I came into your business, right, as a realtor, and I wouldn't be able to know what it is that you do every day. So there's no expectation. Why would you know how my job works?
Yeah.
Because it is just, at the end of the day, it's a job, right? Like I know a bunch of things about a bunch of topics, and I have to do my best to explain those to clients in a way that's understandable and makes sense. So, I use examples. I try to listen to their goals and understand what it is they're trying to accomplish, because a lot of times that really informs a lot of what the planning ends up looking like. What are they really trying to do with their assets versus some cookie cutter, like put them into some like cookie cutter type thing.
Like I saw this on YouTube. I want mine set up like this.
Yeah.
Or I downloaded this document. I want it set up like that.
Yeah, and so I know there's a lot of online like do-it-yourself programs out there now where you can set up your own will for free or low cost. I've looked at a lot of them, and some of them are better than others. But the problem is that you don't know what you don't know, right? And there's no nuance in the way that the bot or whatever it is that's asking you the questions, they have their list of questions and you just are answering them, but they're not going to know to, when you say, oh, I have children from a prior relationship, or I don't get along with my kids. Like they're going to ask you if you have children, but not like, do you like them?
Yeah.
Or do you have family members that you don't ever want to be a beneficiary or have anything to do with your estate? That's the human part of the conversation where you're trying to drill down into what is actually happening in this person's life. So
there's with AI, I know a lot of people who use AI a lot, and even with AI, even with negotiating, people use it to help them figure out how to negotiate. And when I look at those, it is missing I think humans are way better than AI, obviously. I hope so. Well, some humans.
at least right now, yeah.
Yeah. But even those negotiation tactics, they're not as good as it would be if I was negotiating. So I'm sure with setting up a will, AI being like, this is my situation, create something, there's going to be things missing or things that aren't spelled out right?
Yes. And, there's been several court cases now where lawyers have used AI to generate documents, not so much wills, I haven't heard of that yet, but like briefs and things that were filed with the court. And the AI just makes up cases, like things that aren't even real. And nobody checked it.
Like mentions this other case where this happened.
So-and-so versus so-and-so.
A story in a book.
With like a site and everything. So you look at it and you think, oh, this must be real, right?
Wow.
There's a certain way that lawyers cite back to cases.
Yeah.
And, but what happens is you file those things. A clerk reads, clerks of the court will be reading that and searching for cases, and the cases aren't there and nobody checked.
Wow.
So, there's limitation. That's an example that's probably a little bit outside of what we're talking about, but I think it's a good way to think about the AI. To me is like an enhancement tool, but you still have to have the underlying knowledge to be able to know what you're asking it to do, right? If you don't really know what to put into the system, you're not going to get out back something that is a quality document.
You don't have to think as much. You can use it and then review everything, improve it the way you want, check your facts, and then, okay.
Yeah, I use it for cleaning up language. I know sometimes I'm writing something and I feel like it could be said better, so I'll pop it into something I use and have it clean it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's amazing. It makes our lives so much easier. We don't have to think as much. We can think or focus our energy somewhere else where it's more important.
But when it comes to legal documents, you want to be sure that somebody who knows what they're doing is looking at them. And things are just really hard. When I started doing this almost 20 years ago as a lawyer, and for 10 years before that was a paralegal, so I've been doing this for a long time. Not that things weren't hard back then. I'm not trying to make myself sound old, but it seems like things have just gotten more complicated and more complex. Things that used to be more straightforward, tend to have complexities to them that, it's hard for the average person to navigate, because people are busy. You don't have time to research everything there is to know about a probate matter or a trust, right? So that's the value of expertise.
Okay, so with the trust, I have a ton of questions. So a trust, kind of like a corporation, can hold assets.
Correct.
If I think of it that way. Okay, so a trust, so you can have I have this warehouse with furniture. That could be a trust.
So what I would say is the way it's
or it's money and property.
Yeah, it can be any kind of asset almost can be held by a trust. So there's certain things that
Crypto?
Yeah, you can hold crypto in a trust.
Okay.
It's about title. So, right, you own your house, right? And when you go down to City Hall, there's a deed that says, Kamil owns this house, right?
Yeah.
But if you put it in a trust, what it would say is the trustee of Kamil's trust owns this house.
Okay.
So when like you go to the bank, your name is on your bank account. Same thing. Trustee of this
Can it
trust.
be called anything besides my name?
Virtually, yes. I mean, I think there's probably some limitations, but
Okay.
there's lots of people that have like lots of different types of trusts, and then they call them all kinds of different things. And it's like the concept of like the LLC, you know, sometimes like an LLC owns another LLC
Yeah.
that owns by an S corp, and
Nice.
so you
Way
create
hidden.
these
You
like
can't find who owns
yeah,
what.
you
I
can
love
create
it.
all kinds of fun complexity.
At what level do they stop looking? They're like, okay, I get it. This just keeps going.
I would say it depends on how much money you're trying to get. Right. I think
Okay.
that's really true for any kind of like thing that you're trying to do.
Yep.
So if who's looking and why are they looking? Generally, they're looking because they're trying to sue you, right? Or they think that they have some kind of claim against you. So
They'll keep
depending on how much
digging deeper
money
and deeper.
is depending on how far they'll follow it.
Okay, so let's say this trust has to be owned by a human.
Well, the trustee has to be
The
generally a person over 18.
Okay.
could
So it can't
be-
be AI.
No,
Just kidding.
it can be like a bank. Banks are trustees, so it can be like a financial entity
Okay.
or another type of entity
Okay.
that has
Like LLC?
an LLC. I guess technically, I don't know that I've ever seen that before, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Okay. Okay, wow. So properties under a trust. Now the trustee, you got a couple of trustees. What if they die?
So most trusts, if they're drafted properly, have provisions that account for that. Because one thing that people should know is that a trust will fail for a lack of a trustee. So you want to have provisions in there that govern how trustees are replaced.
It's not a standard thing where they have a plan for if the trustees.
Well, most practitioners know that. So if you use a practitioner who knows what they're doing, they'll have
Okay.
that provision. So for me, you know, you have backups if they're available, or you have a way for a new trustee to be appointed generally by the beneficiaries or some other interested party would be able to appoint somebody.
Okay.
If not, then it fails and you'd have to go to court and have the court decide. So
Okay,
a
yeah, so that's the
proper-
other question. Is
Right.
like, what if they died and they didn't have a plan? What happens to all those properties?
So, with any trust for any provision, what you're trying to always do is think of all of the worst case scenarios. So, you're trying to put in your main provisions with your main goals and then have backups for everything. So, if X happens or Y happens or whatever happens, right? Like you sell the properties, then what happens? If one of the beneficiaries dies, then what happens? So you're always trying to think through all of those scenarios as you're drafting the documents. That's what a good practitioner will be doing. So you're giving your lawyer your goals, and your lawyer is thinking about all of the possible
Possibilities.
outcomes,
Yeah.
right? And obviously, nobody can think of every possible outcome, but you do your best to be as thorough as possible. So the documents can be fairly long. People get kind of annoyed with me sometimes. They're like, I just wanted something simple. And I keep saying, I'm like, there's nothing simple in this world anymore. So just forget about that part.
So for a trust, aside from the ownership, does an attorney have to be tied in and kind of responsible for it?
I don't typically act as trustee, if that's what you mean. Like, I'm
Okay.
not usually
So an attorney
involved.
can be a trustee?
Yes.
So if someone wants to hide their assets, they could hide it with an attorney?
No. Well, they
Under
shouldn't.
a trustee? The
They
attorney
shouldn't.
has the trustee.
I mean, lawyers can't commit crimes either.
There's
regular
nothing to do with crime. I'm just wondering.
Well, the concept of hiding assets
Oh, goodness, you
feels
caught
like
me. All right.
fraud.
All right.
So I don't commit crimes. Just want to be clear about that on the record. But you can create layers of complexity that will make it harder to find your assets.
Okay.
Like I said, like the same concepts with like the multiple LLCs or, you know, sometimes it's like LLC, trust, S Corp, you know, you can do all kinds of fun things, but you also have to remember you got to manage and administer all of these things, right? So every time you file an LLC, you got to report back to the state. S Corp is reporting out its federal returns. A trust potentially can as well have to have reporting.
Every year?
So if you set up a revocable trust, so
Okay,
just
that's another question.
regular person, you
Yeah.
know, like the average person's trust, that's going to hold like their house and maybe some bank accounts.
Yeah.
You don't have a reporting requirement as long as the initial, what we call grantor or a settlor, the person who set the trust up, is alive. You can
Attorney?
just no,
Oh,
like
just
the,
who
so
initially created or wanted this
so you
created.
set up a trust.
Okay.
While you're alive, you're typically, the way it works is you'd be your own trustee of your own trust and also the beneficiary. It's very
Okay.
so it's all very intermingled. And then you would use your own social security number. There would be no additional reporting requirements.
Okay.
Once you pass away, let's say, your wife and your kids are the beneficiaries now. Now you have to get a new tax ID number for that trust because the entity needs some sort of reporting mechanism.
So you need one social security number tied to a trust.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the function
You could do
of...
multiple?
Yeah,
Or-
if you have two trustees, I suppose, or two people
Okay.
that set it up, so a joint trust,
Yeah.
you can have two people, each of them would be using their social security number.
Okay, and then revocable versus irrevocable?
So revocable is probably pretty obvious. It means that the person who set it up can change it at any time. I like to say it's like that person on paper, if that makes any sense.
Okay, yeah.
So it's like they're setting up their own entity. It's like the Kamil trust is like you on
Yeah,
paper.
I like that. We'll use Kamil as an example. Yeah.
So then the irrevocable trust means that once you set it up, it's way, way, way harder to undo it. It doesn't mean you can never undo it, but what you are really doing is you're giving over control of the assets that are in that trust to somebody else. Generally, that's what you're doing.
Okay.
So we do those for people who are trying to get, do Medicaid protection,
Yeah.
or they're trying to do some sort of gifting strategy. So you would set up an irrevocable trust, what we call fund it, which means you would change the title of whatever the asset is to the
be owned
trust.
by, yeah.
And usually, not in every case, but the trustee is somebody that's not the person that owned it. They no longer have access to the principal. Sometimes they have access to income. It depends on what kind of trust you set up.
And it's a person, like a bank account also would have to be changed to the trust? Or,
If you want it to be in this irrevocable structure, then
okay.
yes.
Okay, so, all right. So let's say I bought a multifamily. I want to set up a trust and now it's making money. So I put that money into the bank account for the trust. How's the tax structure of that as far as income? It gets taxed normally?
Yeah, if you just put it into a regular revocable trust, there's no difference. It's like an LLC. It's like a pass-through entity.
Okay.
So everything would be the same as if you had owned it outright, except that it's in that different entity.
Okay, and
From
the
a
accounting
tax.
is still the same, and
Yeah,
you're
you're gonna
filing
put
for
it-
tax every
Yep,
year?
your Schedule C income and expenses is the same as...
Okay, what if I don't take income from it?
Well, I mean, whatever you would normally do is how
okay.
it would work.
Okay, interesting. All right. So I can also do that and not be the trustee or set myself up. I can create it for someone else and kind of like gift it to them. But there has to be trust. That's why it's called a trust.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it a couple of ways, right? Like, if you have an LLC, you could assign the LLC interest over to someone else. That would technically be transferring the ownership. But if you wanted to put it into a trust so that they don't have complete, full access. So again, let's say you have young children, right? But you want them to inherit your investment property.
Yeah.
You can put it into your own revocable trust and make them the beneficiary and have, let's say you also have it in an LLC. So you assign the interest over to the trust. The trust is now member, managing, person for the LLC.
Okay.
And so then the ownership is the trust.
Yeah.
So you die and then your kids would technically be the
They're next in
beneficiaries.
line. Yeah.
But they may not get access to the actual underlying asset right away.
Okay.
So the trustee could hold the asset and pay out income to them, right? Because it's earning income, it's a rented property. Pay all the taxes, pay all the expenses.
Which they have access to the bank account and
Yeah, so you'd assign everything. I mean,
yeah.
the LLC would most likely own everything, so the assignment of LLC interest would cover all the assets.
And again, they should have a plan on what happens if the person dies. On like who gets control of the money in the bank account.
Yeah, so it would be the trustee would have control.
Access. Yeah.
And then the document would outline what you want to have happen. So income gets paid out to your beneficiaries. And then when they reach a certain age, this is just an example,
Yeah.
then they can take principal distribution, so the house or whatever could be distributed to them, or it can be just held forever. Rhode Island does allow for trusts to be created, what we call dynasty trusts, so you can set one up and it doesn't have to end.
Wow. Okay. So once the person dies, how long does it take for the beneficiaries to have full control?
If it was already in the trust before the person died, it probably takes a couple of months to like work out all the paperwork.
Okay. So they have to go to the attorney that created it and be like, hey, this person died, we're next in line, and we've been a beneficiary. And they have to start the process.
Trust administration. So when somebody dies, whatever assets that they own in their individual name, so let's say you had a house and it was just in your name,
Yeah.
you had another house and you put it into your trust. You pass away, the house that was in your individual name has to go through probate because there's no other way to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah.
But the house that was in the trust does not go through probate. So, but both require administration of the asset. The probate process takes longer, right? There's all kinds of, you have to go to court and wait 6 months after to make distribution. So it's a longer process. The trust administration should be shorter. You know, it just depends on how complicated.
Like they want to sell it off.
Yeah, it depends on how complicated you want to make it. Some people are control freaks and they want to make all these rules and complexity, and then it requires extra work, right? So if you're going to make it difficult, then it's going to be difficult to administer. If you make it fairly straightforward, it's a little bit easier, you know? So it just depends on how complicated not only you want to be, but sometimes just your life is. You know, a lot of people have blended families and they have complicated relationships with their beneficiaries. So it's not as straightforward as just like, here's an asset, we're going to split it in this many shares and then you all get your portion, right? That sometimes works. But what if people start fighting? The good thing about the trust, or at least better, it's not that you can't fight over your shares and you can't have, you know, file a lawsuit about that, but it tends to be the threshold a little bit more complicated because you have to go to superior court and it's very, you know, it's more elevated.
Can you put rules in the trust where I don't want them to fight? This is what's going to happen?
Yeah, you can put what's called a no contest clause.
Okay.
And say if anybody challenges this trust, basically they get removed. They are treated as if they had died. Yeah.
Wow, that's a good way to have people listen.
Those aren't valid in all states, though.
Okay. Wow.
So
that's really cool. Oh my gosh. Hope everybody's like paying attention. There's so many ins and outs to trust. So why would someone create a trust when they could just open up an LLC and have this property under?
yeah, again, it's like there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, right? So part of my job is to look at people's whole situation and understand what their goals are and then give them advice, right? Be like, well, you can go down pathway A or B or C. There's no like, unfortunately in the law, there's never like one answer. Like if you know any lawyers and you ask them a question and they're always like, it depends, right? That's basically our standard answer.
I love that.
For
That's
everything.
cool.
So it depends.
Yep.
You know, on what you're trying to accomplish, right? You want to just get assets to somebody else after you die. You may not need the trust if you have correct governing documents that allow for the next phase of whatever the business is that you set up.
Okay.
But if you have like people you don't want to have actual access and control, you may just want them to be getting income, right? Then the trust might be a better function for that. There's all kinds of different ways to set it up so that you can accomplish what all of your goals are. So I'm not necessarily like a business attorney, so I don't want to like confuse anybody. I know enough about it to probably sound, you know, like I kind of know what I'm talking about. So all the people out there are going to say I said the wrong things about LLCs, fine, whatever. But so I think another piece of this that's important is that, you know, it's hard to be a person with assets without like a team of people, right? So your estate planner, some people are also like really good at doing the business stuff too. Again, I'm decent at some of it, but I try to stay in my lane, you know. So I have other lawyers that I tap into who I would say, okay, this person has a more complicated situation. Maybe they have multiple businesses or things that they're trying to do that's outside of my purview. So I tap into that person. They have a CPA, right? You tap into that person because they're looking at your situation from a different perspective. So what you want is everybody to kind of be looking at it from their lens and then coming up with a plan that makes sense for you it requires a bit of coordination. Sometimes it's a little bit more expensive. But, if you have the type of estate that needs that kind of attention, you don't want to skimp on a few $1,000s and then end up in a mess, or your family ends up in like $10, $15, $50,000 of litigation later, right? So it's better to maybe put a little bit extra time and, money into the planning than to end up in a situation where now everybody's fighting or it's unclear what's supposed to happen. So it's like, tied up or can't continue. So that's the kind of stuff that's like frustrating.
Okay, so back to the tax thing. So you're saying if I have a trust, multifamily, money's coming in, I don't want that money on my tax. It goes under the trust's filing. So this way I'm not receiving any income.
Well,
right? That's
so
how just like an LLC or like a corporation.
Right. So the IRS is on to you already.
I'm just saying hypotheticals.
No, I know. But I'm just saying, like, yes, except that trusts are taxed at a much higher rate at a much lower threshold than you are.
Oh, okay. So why would I do that?
Again, it depends.
Okay.
So a lot of times when I set them up so the income gets paid out to a person.
Okay.
Because people typically pay less taxes than trusts do.
Okay.
So, again, I'm not a tax attorney, but I don't remember all the numbers, but it was something like $15,000 or $17,000 is when you're going to start paying like the top tax rate, right?
Oh.
Versus like the regular person, the progressive tax rates are much lower, right? At $20,000, you don't probably pay almost any taxes if you made that much income, right?
Okay.
So you want to try to push out income to people because they're typically going to pay less tax.
Okay.
But there are times when the trust will pay the tax because there's some other like overarching thing that needs to happen. Again, if you have like minor children or a situation with maybe a person who's on some kind of government benefits or something, and if they receive income, they're going to get kicked off their benefits.
Okay.
You'd be better off paying the tax at the trust tax rate than this person losing their benefits. So that's what I mean. Like it's all very circumstantial. It's hard to just give you like a flat answer.
Yeah, that's great that you're able to help people. If someone came in, I want to trust, then you're like, hey, let's talk about it. Like, what are you trying to do? What are your goals? And then help them with, what they actually will need help with, which is something not what they watched on YouTube and want to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when people come in and they've done some research and they're more informed, it is sometimes easier to have conversations.
Okay.
But what I try to do is when people come in, I have this like little speech that I give them that I'm actually I'm in the process of trying to like record it and just send it out. Is another thing I think is... so I'm going to set up a way for people to look at it ahead of time if they feel so compelled. Because it's almost always the same, because it's not because I think people are not smart. But I want to make sure that we're having a conversation, we're using terminology the same way, right? So people come in and they say things to me like, I want to set up a living will, but what they think that term means and what I think that term means may not be the same thing. So there's a point where I think you have to define terms. So I usually start out my meetings with new clients by defining like, what is a will? What is a trust? What is an executor? What's a beneficiary? So that we're talking about the same thing and I'm not using terms that they're not familiar with and then they get confused, right? And then I don't get good information. Because that's the thing is I can't do what I need to do unless people tell me the information. I can't independently verify anything that they're telling me, really. Except for maybe like I can go look up whether they own a house or something like that. But I don't have can't type it in and be like, how many bank accounts does, Jim Smith own? There's no way for me to know that, right?
Yeah.
Or does he have like kids from some other relationship that he's not telling me about, right? So I try to tell people like the documents and the plan is only as good as the information that you give me.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult because you have to create a level of trust with people, right? And I'm sure in your business it's somewhat similar, right?
Yeah.
You have to go in and people have to trust that A, you know what you're doing, B, you have their best interest at heart, right? And also understand that whatever they tell me is confidential and I cannot tell anybody else. So, creating that is part of the relationship. And I think it's an important part of it that needs to be more talked about because, people are afraid of lawyers. They think they're going to talk like down to them and make them feel stupid. And I have seen other lawyers in my life do that to people, but it's not helpful. You're not going to get the best, responses from people if you make them feel like they don't know what they're doing, right? So you're trying to constantly cultivate a level of trust with people so that they can tell you their secrets, basically.
Can someone buy a trust?
I suppose if it was, what I've done in the past is, you sell assets from it, but it would be difficult, I think, to buy the whole.
You can sell assets, so I don't want to break up the trust, so sell you this portion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Same as, like I said, the LLC or something could, if it owned 5 properties, it could sell one of them.
Okay.
So the seller is the trustee, right? So whoever that person is.
Okay, so they can sell their whole batch to someone. Okay. What if there's a trustee has the beneficiaries, his kids, he dies, all of a sudden out of nowhere, oh, that was my dad, his long lost son, I should get some of that. Happens? Is it fun? Is it a fun?
Well, it's fun in a sense for me. I mean, just because, you don't get to do those kinds of things all the time. So it's fun to do all the research and figure out what the answers to the questions are.
Yeah.
Not necessarily fun for the family though, right? So
because in that situation, the trustee is the dad and wanted to, have everything in a trust for a reason. And then his kids have it. And now there's third kid that he never knew about. So what happens in those?
it could be a situation where the child, if they can prove that they are in fact,
DNA.
the biological child, or even adopted, that's another one too. Wow. Then they have potentially rights over the assets.
Even if it's a trust.
Well, the thing about the trusts is that, again, if they're drafted correctly, you're putting stuff in there and you're naming your beneficiaries, usually by name.
By name, okay.
This is where it gets tricky, because sometimes I'll set up trusts for people with younger children, right? They're newly married maybe and they have one child, but they tell me, we're probably going to have more kids. And so I'll put in there, Jimmy is the beneficiary after the mom and dad.
Yeah.
Or any children, we'll say something to the effect of any children born of this marriage.
Oh.
Right. So, but again, so you can prove, right? These two people were married, they had this child, right? But in Rhode Island, there are claims that have been made by, usually
Superior Court?
in a trust situation, you'd have to go to Superior Court.
So once a case is...
But it's harder to do because, you will put things in the trust that say, these are my children. No one else is my child. So, that's a simplified way of saying it.
Okay.
So that, you prevent those types of things. Not that they don't happen that often. I would say I've dealt with maybe 2 of those in my career.
Wow. Okay.
It's more for the estate side. So again, remember we talked about assets that you own outside of a trust.
Yeah.
That's where somebody could come in and make a claim.
Yeah.
Because what probate does is it creates a forum, right? Automatically. Because you have to probate a will in order for it to be effective. So once you submit it to the court, now you have created way for people to come forward and be heard. Versus the trust doesn't need to go to court. Actually, unless something has gone wrong, it should never go to court, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So there's no forum created. So if you want to make a claim, you have to create the forum for that claim to be made as the person aggrieved, which is why it sometimes makes it a little bit more challenging to do that.
Okay. This is a crazy scenario, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this or heard about a situation where the dad dies, okay, he has a trust, and the kids get half of it, right, because that's how it's set up. Then there's another long-lost son that comes in the picture and says, hey, guys, I'm your brother. Have you ever seen a situation where those two say, oh, wow, yeah, let's split it, all 3 of us?
I haven't seen it, but
Have
it's
you heard
possible.
of anybody being generous? Because I could see one person being generous, but 2 being generous?
Yeah, I suppose that would be harder to do.
Yeah,
but the thing would
fight.
be is that so the people who were named, so they would still be the beneficiaries. If they were going to give anything to this third person, that would be a gift from them they'd still be their assets.
Yeah.
They would have to give it to the third person. It wouldn't be coming from the trust directly.
Okay.
Which matters because it depends on how much money you're talking about, right? So if
Okay.
you're going to make gifts, you potentially have to file gift tax returns. So sometimes it's not as easy as like, oh, it's just more fair. Sometimes it's like, well, yeah, but now I'm on the hook to pay gift taxes potentially, or, it's not as easy as I can just split it into 3 now because the trust can't really give assets to the beneficiary that's not
Unless
named.
they add the third person and keep the trust.
That would be pretty hard to do because once the person who set it up dies, it actually at that point generally becomes irrevocable.
Okay.
So
and
you
what if
can't
those two
change
die?
the terms.
I mean, there should be a plan for that.
Yeah, the contingencies go out pretty far.
Okay. All right. Now, the last part, which is like mostly why people think of trusts, is the nursing home. Well, that's why I said hide.
Yes.
They want to hide their assets. So when they go to the nursing home, they're not, what are the 5 years that they don't have
They'll
to
look back, yeah.
They'll look back? Okay. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay. I'll do my best to explain it as simply as possible. So typically if you need to go into a nursing home, you have to be able to pay for it, right? So
Monthly?
monthly. And a typical month nursing home cost can run you between 10 and up. I've heard of places now that are charging $500 per day, which if you do the math is like 18 grand. I don't know, maybe not. I'm not a good mathematician.
Crazy.
So
It's like a
again.
mansion. What are they living in?
Yeah, so in places now, and I mean, this is kind of like one of my personal pet peeves about like our whole system in general,
Horrible.
is that, I understand that things cost money, right? And that, how else are you going to pay for things, right? You're going to pay for services. But it does feel like it's becoming more and more unattainable. So even if you do qualify for Medicaid somehow, it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily the best outcome. Most places now I've heard of anyway, so this is just anecdotal, they're requiring you to be able to private pay for your care for 3 years. So even at 10, that's what, $40,000 or something? I mean, $400,000 that you have to have
Oh my gosh.
to be able to show them that you can pay. And most people's biggest asset is what? Their house, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody came to me and wanted to put their house into a Medicaid trust, there would be a lot of conversation about that, right? Like, what does that actually mean? What are you, again, really trying to accomplish? Do you have other assets that you can access to be able to pay for care for some period of time, right? So I can explain to you how it works, but it's a lot more complicated because Medicaid beds are few and far between now, right? So a lot of places I've heard, going out of business, like basically closing the doors if they're Medicaid only because they can't figure out how the numbers work, right?
Yeah.
The reimbursements are so low compared to what they're trying to pay staff and medical costs on, the business side of things. So it's complicated, right? But you can set up what is called a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. That's typically what it's called.
Okay.
It is an irrevocable trust. So you set it up. There's different schools of thought as to who the trustee should be or not be. So sometimes,
Mostly it's the kids.
usually it's somebody else, but it should be a house that doesn't have a mortgage on it. You can, I guess, technically put a house that has a mortgage on it into a trust like that. I have other practitioners who do it that way.
Lenders don't like that.
They don't like that.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's the theory of like, as long as the mortgage is getting paid, they're typically not paying that much attention. But if they find out, they can call the mortgage, right? So again, it's like you give people the information and you let them decide what kind of risk they want to take. Like, it's not my job to pick the way you end up doing things. I can tell you what is legal, what is like the risks of what you're about to do, and then you have to decide, right? Because it's not my decision to make. But let's say you have, the perfect scenario is like kids that get along, maybe mom who's living in a house, who's getting a little bit older. She definitely is not going to sell it, right? Because that's the other thing is once you put it into this trust, it's really hard to sell it and because you lose control over the principal. So even if you do sell it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So even if you put it into this trust, it may not matter. So you want to have a situation where you're putting an asset that you're going to keep into this trust, and then your fingers crossed the person isn't going to need care for 5 years, right? But again, these are all unknowns.
Wow.
Right? So you do it hoping like the person is in decent health. There's no like critical diagnosis.
but hopefully their Social Security and the income or whatever from 401k and all that, dividends and all that add up to 10,000, and they'll be good.
Or
Then
they
you
have
don't need to,
right. There's
right?
some other way that they're structuring this, right? So then you put it into this trust, and if you get to the 5 years and you apply for Medicaid and you are otherwise qualified, there's a whole bunch of other things you need to do.
Okay.
The house would be technically not counted as part of Medicaid's overall looking at your financial picture. So you would, quote unquote, save the house. But again, it's just, I tell this to people and they're like, well, what if I want to sell it and like move to Florida or something? And I'm like, well, you can't. I mean, you can sell it, but you don't get access to the principal.
Yeah.
So it's tricky.
Buy it with the money. You can do that.
Yeah, I mean, technically maybe, but then it's tricky because now you're talking about two different states. Medicaid is different in every state.
Oh, goodness.
So,
Wow.
it just makes it a little more complicated. And technically the kids are the beneficiaries of that irrevocable trust.
Yeah.
So it's their money. If they don't want to buy you a new house, they don't have to. So that's why, again, you have to have a really sometimes perfect scenario, right?
Yeah.
Like what family everybody gets along and everybody's on board all the time. It exists, but it's not. That's why you have to be asking lots of questions. To do a plan like that is pretty labor intensive to get all the information that you need to be able to give the people the information that they need to be able to make the decision. I mean, I do like planning letters for them and they'll be like 4 or 5 pages long of like, here's all of the scenario,
Wow.
But again, it's so that they can make an informed decision.
Okay. Goodness. Yeah. All right. We started with you saying it's complicated. And it is definitely complicated. So someone should definitely meet with you and talk to you about how they want to set up. So how do people find you?
So I have a website. It's Dupras, Dupras law.com. There's a contact form on there. And then my cell phone number is on there. My office line rings to my phone, text. I have email, all kinds of ways people can reach me. But I would, just to clarify, right?
Yeah.
So I think that people come in with a lot of things, right, in their head, and the complexity is there. But I have had more than one client tell me by the end of the process, they feel like a lot better, right? Like that's the goal, is that it comes in as like a puzzle and then we leave with like a completed thing, right? So that they feel like they understand what they did, they feel good about it, they know that like they can come back and ask questions. So I try to give people like a flat fee, like I tell them this is how much it's going to cost for me to do this. And then also to let them come back and say, 6 months down the road, they're watching like CNBC, right? And they see something about taxes and they're like, wait a minute. Just call me. You can chat for a few minutes, talk you off the ledge. And then you can, if something needs to be changed, we can change it. But if not, then like, don't feel like you can't call me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to send you like surprise bills in the mail. So I try to create more of a relationship that way. I think it works out better.
Yeah, definitely important. Awesome. Well, that's good to know. You help make the puzzle easier.
Sometimes. I mean, I say, most of the time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for stopping by and answering all my questions. And
All right,
thank you.
Great. Thank you.